Hi. So I wanted to hop on here and talk a little bit about overcare. It's something I'm learning in my trauma informed coaching certification course. And it's really interesting. I think it's just super important for everyone to be aware of how caregiving is really programmed into our DNA, especially as people who identify as caregivers or are caring in any kind of way. So, care obviously creates, and I'm reading some notes here, so I'll be looking off, to the side a little bit, but care creates a sense of security and connection with others, right? So these are important ingredients for a therapeutic relationship, and especially in a setting like a coaching setting, a setting with a therapist where there's a client and a provider. The client is receiving the care and the provider is providing the care in a way, right? This can get really mixed up when the person who's in charge of the caregiving gets overly involved in that person's trajectory, in their emotional well being, the over identification or becoming emotionally triggered by that client's story. And this is why, so in my last talk, I talked about heart focused breathing, which is a really important or just a really nice little practice to when you are in that caregiving position to come back to yourself and regulate your own nervous system so you don't get pulled into the other person's emotional responses. So you can really hold a safe space while not getting, sucked into their things that are going on. And a lot of those things may be really heavy and hard. So I am positive that people who are not in actual caregiving professions get pulled into overcare all the time. It's a really easy thing to do as an empathetic person. So I want to go through a little bit of like a list and then how we can connect these things to parts of our lives and how it shows up. So like I said before, I first want to read a quote. I love this quote. It's on my little worksheet. Genuine care flows from the heart, while overcare is the emotional and mental charge that builds around over identifying with the story of the client or with our idea of an agenda for the client. Susann von, I cannot pronounce that last name. But yeah, so the over identifying with the story of the client or with our idea of an agenda for the client. This is so important as a trauma informed coach that I'm not projecting what I want for myself and what I see as healing for myself, what I see my point B is, my end point, that may not look the same for that person. That person that I'm currently providing services for may not want the same things that I want and may not be able to get there in the same ways that I was able to get there. So of course, it's really great to have the foundation for me as a caregiver where I've had trauma in my past, I've worked through it in my own ways, and have been able to get to a place where I can hold space for other people and help other people in their healing processes. But at the same time, that can become confused, especially like as a new coach. And I've been in this for about a year and I've just like learned so much along the way. But I noticed in the past, this came up a lot, where I would like project more instead of becoming more curious about the client situation, projecting about where I thought they should be or where I thought they wanted to be without really investigating what they wanted and how they were going to get there. So being overly attached to a particular outcome for the client, so important to be aware of. And this isn't just in a client coach relationship, it's in any kind of other relationship that you could have. Becoming overly attached to that person's outcome, so attached that it is taking it, it's like you are taking the responsibility for their journey through, when really it's their responsibility, right? So it's like being overly attached to an outcome for them that they may not even want for themselves or are ready to seek out for themselves. So really important to hold space in that way and become curious with people about what it is they want, um, if they're ready for certain steps in the healing process. Um, yeah, super important. So another thing is like worrying about a client after the close of a session or in the middle of the night. And, as a nurse as well, this is something that has come up so many times for me in my nursing career so far, that like rumination after I've left work, after that, book has closed, and just bringing my work home with me. And I'm finding, just as a coach now and how I've had a bunch of years under my belt with this particular thing, it was something that I remember when I would like be in job interviews for nursing, and they would be like, what's your, biggest flaw or whatever, that question where you try to twist it to still make it sound good. You're like, oh, I work too hard. I'm a workaholic. Mine was always like, I bring my work home with me. And it's true. I would, but in like the nursing world or in the caregiving world, an employer doesn't see that necessarily as a bad thing. That can be perceived as a good thing, even though it is not. On like a personal, emotional, mental, emotional level, it is not good for me. But as a caregiver, that's something that is like, not frowned upon necessarily, to bring your work home with you and be thinking about and ruminating on the people that you are helping throughout the day. So this is really important because, again, we are only responsible for us, for ourselves. We really are not responsible for other people, but that doesn't mean that we don't hold that loving space for them and help them in ways that feel good to us. But it's that over identification with, this person has to get to this place. If they don't get to this place by this certain time, I'm a failure, I'm whatever. So it's like taking so much of that responsibility. It's so heavy, like it's such a heavy burden. And in relationships that are on the more codependent side or very codependent side, we see people overly identifying, whether it's one person overly identifying with the other or both overly identifying with each other, getting so swept up in the other person's shit that like you forget about yourself and you forget about taking care of yourself and coming back to yourself, knowing that you're responsible for yourself, not the other person. So I said a little bit about this before, or I mentioned it before, but taking responsibility for how fast a client is progressing. It's not just a client, it's anyone. How fast a person who you really care about is progressing, or if they experience a relapse. I know this is a really tricky one with people who have substance abuse issues. We can feel really responsible for their relapses. And again, it's not your responsibility, it's their responsibility when they're ready to heal. And then of course supporting them however we can in the process by creating a loving and safe space for them whenever possible and referring them to people. This is obviously very complicated. Our mental health system in the West is pretty horrible. There are many people who really care and who really want to do good and want to change the system, but a lot of those people are not accessible, whether it's because they don't take insurance or not available. Yeah, the system, that's a whole tangent, but it's kind of a mess. So I want to like really acknowledge that. It's a really important piece about mental health care in this country. But yeah, taking responsibility for how fast a client or a person in your life is progressing. Next, what I kind of mentioned at the top of this talk, projecting what you think healing should look like for a client or for anyone. What you think healing should look like, what you think their life should look like, what you think they should do to get there, and being so set on those things that you are unwilling to be flexible with, the potentials that they don't want the same thing you want for them, or that their healing is going to look very different than how you think it should look. It's really important. So those are really the main things. And to balance the depleting effects of overcare, because it's very depleting, you're not only worrying about yourself, you're now so consumed in another person's reality, in another person's healing and their healing process, that you're taking on the burden of another life. And I get that it can be so hard to separate yourself from that, but this is what I'm teaching with these videos, slowly but surely, hopefully. So how to balance the depleting effects of overcare. First, the first most important thing, and this goes for so many things that I work with clients on, increasing your awareness of when you're in overcare, just literally noticing when it's happening, noticing when you are getting so pulled into someone else's story that you forget your own story. Your story now becomes their story, and it's so interwoven and so intertwined. Your emotions are dependent on that person, and you are getting flung around based on how that person is handling things. It's a really hard place to be in. So the awareness of when you are in that space, when you feel yourself even starting to get pulled into a place of trying to overcare give, when you are in a place of staying up all night, ruminating, wondering, worrying about another person and their healing process. And I know, obviously, we're going to worry about people. Obviously, this isn't like just harden yourself and don't think or worry about anyone. There's a balance to be had, right? And a really good example is the less personal one, because when it's about someone personal in your life, a family member, a loved one, it's really hard to detach and to separate and have those boundaries. So I get that. An easier example is like me with a client. If I'm up all night after a really hard or intense conversation with a client and I can't get sleep and I can't relax and I can't think of anything but their situation and their story, it's a sign of like, okay, that's a moment where I can be mindful and aware of when I'm in over caregiving mode, and just come back to my heart center, come back to noticing my heart, doing some breathing, noticing my body, some somatic work, things like that. And the next thing is, I just said it, heart-focused breathing to neutralize the emotional charge around the desire to over caregive, over caretake. So I hope this is helpful. I'll continue talking about this as the weeks go on. Really liking doing lives lately. So hopefully you got something out of this. Talk soon.